Howdy, ladies and gentlemen. This is Paul, the Redneck Thinker. Thomas Jefferson said, "If you want something you've never had, you must be willing to do something you've never done." Benjamin Franklin said, "Without continual growth and progress, such words as improvement, achievement, and success have no meaning." Basically, we've got to move forward in this life, and to do those things, we've got to grow, and we've got to figure out on how to do things we ain't never done before. Now, I'm going to say a little something about this channel before I get started. I've had a bunch of folks who talk about they want this to be a little bit more professional of a channel for them to listen to it. Okay, I can understand that. I don't do all that fancy music because I want to eventually start making money from this. And you've got folks that if you got music, they want to do copyright hits. So I haven't quite figured out what kind of music I can use for that yet. This is new to me. I'm trying that whole, if you want something you've never had, you must be willing to do something you've never done. I've got to figure that out, how to do that correctly. And I'm trying to get that continual growth and progress. But the main part of this channel that I'm doing, I'm going back to the days of my youth. Now, I don't know how many of y'all grew up in the country that listen to me. But when I was growing up in the country, the older folks would sit somewhere. A lot of them would be sitting there with a knife and a piece of wood, and they'd be whittling. And they weren't running around like chickens with their heads cut off. They weren't sitting there trying to have a heart attack. And I'm well aware that the financial situation now is a lot different than the financial situation then, but country folks ain't ever had that good of financial stability. On top of the fact of that we got a bunch of city slickers that are coming into the country and trying to take everything over, trying to turn everything into housing developments that have HOAs that tell you got to have your yard looking a certain way and all of this. And that's making everything more expensive. But country folks ain't never had what you'd call a lot of money and a lot of fancy stuff. But the older folks will sit there and they will sit there and talk with each other. And if you're a smart young person, and it don't matter if you're male or female, if you're a smart young person, you sit there, keep your mouth shut, and I'm not telling you to shut up. In no way am I telling you to shut up. But you listen to them. Now, I got a little age on me. I ain't as old as some folks are. I've talked to some folks around here, but I'm at that age where I'm going to want to sit on the front porch and whittle. I want to do that redneck thinking. Older folks will listen to each other because they know that some folks have different knowledge than they do. Doesn't mean that they're smarter. Doesn't mean that they're more learned. It just means that some folks focus on different things than others do. And I've grown up with my way of looking at things. A lot of it's history based more than it is science and all this other stuff. But I did grow up learning a little bit of science here and there, and I've been known to read my fair share of books. And so I'm just telling you what I think, because we have a whole bunch of fancy folks with these fancy degrees that are getting on here and they're giving you slick productions. Well, I'm here to tell you, I'm here to cause you to think. I ain't here to give you slick productions. I'm here to cause you to think. Just like the older folks caused me to think when I was growing up. And that's the whole point of why I'm doing what I'm doing. Now, let's talk about a few things that I've been paying attention to lately. One of the things that mark a stable the beginnings of stability in a country is their ability to provide food, not through government handouts, but provide food for those people that live in their country. Citizens are able to grow their own food, and if they live somewhere they can't, they have ready access to it. Well, we're starting to get to the point in this country where our food stability ain't really getting that good. I mean, you got some folks that are working on that, but our food stability really is going downhill. Now, let's take a look at a few of the reasonings behind that. Now, I found out a decade or so ago, actually, it's probably longer than that now, but y'all ever heard of the company Gwaltney? They make like sausage and meat products, stuff like that. They compete with like Jimmy Dean, those kind of companies. Well, I grew up, they're based out of Smithfield, Virginia. One of my sides of my family, I'm kin to the Gwaltneys. Not saying that I've ever met them. I'm just saying that I was told about them. Well, I knew a little bit about them at that point because I'd had Gwaltney sausage, but I didn't really know who they were. So I was starting to pay attention to who they were because I was told, hey, they're my family. I'm like, okay. Well, come to find out, by the time I found out about them, they had already sold the company. The brand name is now owned by a Chinese company. Basically, Chinese government owns them because that's how things are done over there. All these major companies that you see that are Chinese, well, they've got some Chinese government ownership. If it ain't directly the Chinese government, it's Chinese Communist Party has got part of it. And I'm like, well, that's kind of ridiculous, but that's the way things are lately. We got a whole bunch of companies that are getting bought up by the Chinese. And a lot of it's our food companies, a lot of industries, period. But a lot of our food industries are getting bought up by the Chinese. That don't bring a lot of stability. I mean, Chinese aren't exactly known for their food stability anyway. I mean, you had the great Mao Zedong, who, in his push, thinking the swallows were a bad thing, decided to try to kill a whole bunch of them, which caused insects to multiply, and it just got ridiculous because common sense was not part of Mao's way of doing things, even though the Chinese still love the man, and we've got a whole bunch of liberals that seem to love that man. And it ain't just companies. How many of y'all are paying attention to the fact that we got our farmland that's getting bought up by Chinese companies? The government is making it so difficult for farmers that they're having to sell off their land. And one of the groups that's buying this land up is Chinese government. They got plenty of land over there to grow their own food, but they're buying our land, our farmland. And that's another thing that's not very helpful for keeping us stable when it comes to food, that is. I mean, seriously, think about this. Food stability. The country's Venezuela was a very stable country at one point, and it was a beautiful place. And then they got in their heads that they were going to listen to a socialist and look at how unstable it is. And one of the first things that went out of control in that country was their food. All of a sudden, these folks who are living all over the place are having to eat dogs if they can even find them. They're having to scrounge up for food if they're even able to find it. And a lot of them are starving. Why? Because tyrannical governments don't cause you to have food stability. They cause the exact opposite. They want to control everything, and food does not need government control. You put a bunch of rednecks on a piece of property, one of the first things they're going to look at is whether they can put a garden in. That's one of the smarter things that a redneck does that some of you college educated city folk don't understand. And you got a younger generation that's sitting there going, well, I don't need to live out in the country. It ain't exciting. And I want to move away from the country because, well, there ain't as many opportunities. Never mind the fact that you need to create your own opportunities. And then there's the simple fact of that if you're living out in the country, you don't have to worry about food if you know what you're doing. Seriously. All you got to do if you're a country is take some of your land, plant some vegetables. Heck, it don't take that much land to make a cow happy. Now, pigs, you might want a little bit extra land, just for the simple fact of that can cause stink, but they don't actually need that much land. So you got pork and beef. Chickens don't need a lot of land to run around on. But you've got all this country land that's getting bought up by these housing developments, and it's got these HOAs moving in and taking control. And these HOAs aren't wanting you to be able to have gardens. They ain't wanting you to have cows and chickens and pigs. No, they're telling you you've got to have a yard. They're wanting obedience out of you. You've got city governments that are spreading out, and they're taking a lot of that there land and telling people, oh, you might have grown a garden there before, but that's not what we want in our city, because that just doesn't look cityfied enough. And the land that could be getting used for that is now going to the Chinese. And then throw in the fact that also the companies that we have that handled our food that we could trust. Because Gwaltney everybody trusted Gwaltney brand foods when I was growing up. Well, that ain't American no more. Smithfield products, that's another popular product back in the day. That's owned by the Chinese. So, that's concerning, sure. Here's a second area, and I just read an article about this the other day. And I understand why it's being done the way it is. Our farmland in some areas is being taken up by green energy. Now, you can still graze cattle around the wind farms. If you do it right, you can grow some crops around the wind farms, but it takes a lot of, you got to be able to get around the wind farm. So it still takes up quite a bit of space for just the wind farms. And then you've got these solar farms that everybody is so enamored with. Number one, solar may sound good, but it is not meant for utility sized power generation. Now, if you're up in space, sure, having these big old solar panel arrays is a good thing. But when you're down here on Earth, that's taking up land. Land that could be used for farming. Okay, sure, you could put it out in the desert, but even the desert. Solar, I've explained this before, but I'll explain it again. That heating up, I've seen pictures where people are like, oh, have these animals running around underneath of it. They must be pretty new solar panel farms, because animals are going to want to rest in the shade. They ain't wanting to rest where it's heating up. And that's what happens underneath of a solar panel farm. And I have read through multiple sources, and I understand how it all works, where the solar panels are heating up the ground underneath of it. You start cooking that ground, it starts getting rid of the nutrients that's in the soil so that plants can't grow. And say that you start getting some smart folks that go, we don't need all them solar panels to generate our electricity. If they do pull up all of these solar panel farms, now you've got to spend a lot of money to get them nutrients back in the soil, because the plants are gone. You can't when the plants get there, they die off during the fall time, and them rotting puts nutrients back in the soil. Well, you ain't got that with solar panels. They don't want plants, because the plants will grow up and start messing with the functioning. They could grow up too big and damage the solar panels. So you really ain't got any plants growing there, which is actually contributing to CO2, because people don't seem to understand that plants love CO2. There's a whole lot of people that were surprised. I was in shock. I honestly was. You city slickers confuse the living daylights out of me. The best way to get rid of CO2 out of the air ain't got nothing to do with what you put inside of these scrubbers and things like that. No, you plant things. Not grass. I mean, grass, yeah, of course. But no, you plant trees and you plant these other plants. These flowering plants, these plants that grow food. And that eats up that CO2. Those plants love CO2. Actually, far more than grass does. I mean, grass, okay, fine. Grass is grass. They're plants. They need CO2. They need water. But this is all destroyed by these solar panel plants. And now they're wanting to take some of this farmland in our country and turn it over to solar panel plants. It's destroying the soil. It's destroying the ecosystem. These so-called folks are talking about, oh, the ecosystem. Take a look around some of these here solar power places. It destroys the ecosystem. You've got to do it, or else these things ain't going to function right. So for very little gain, you're causing a whole lot of destruction. But these folks are wanting to have these solar power plants because they've got this pie in the sky dream. These Barbie dolls and these Ken dolls up in Congress are going, well, this sounds like a good idea. Another reason that our farmland is getting destroyed is something that most people don't actually think about. They think, okay, well, if it rains, and it's water, by the way, for some of you city folks that can't seem to understand that the human body is omnivorous. Humans are not carnivores. They're not vegetarians. The human body requires meat and vegetables. And these folks, you're not believable when you tell me, oh, the human body doesn't or can't handle meat. It does bad things to it. The first human societies were hunter-gatherers. They went around hunting. And we survived a long time by just hunting and gathering. Then you got some smart folks that started the agrarian civilizations because hunter-gatherers just wandered around. But these folks that started these agrarian communities still had a lot of meat. They figured out how to domesticate these animals. They were the smart ones. They figured out how to domesticate the animals. And they turned it into farms. Well, you kind of need water to make plants grow. Yeah, I'm well aware that on occasion you have drought. I am well aware that it can't be salt water that you use. But at the same time, if you're limiting how people get water because there's some kind of little critter running around in the water, you ain't making a lot of sense. Them little critters don't need you to destroy our farming because farmers are well aware that we need multiple critters running around to do things right. Most farmers understand God's plan far better than you do with your fancy degrees. In California, because they have limited access to certain waterways, not because they're maintaining it to make sure that they don't run out of water. No, they're doing it to protect little critters that they're claiming's fixing to die off. Well, I ain't that old. I'm older than some, younger than others, but I don't remember ever seeing a saber-toothed tiger walking around. And I know for a fact that there's been bones of them critters all over the place. Dinosaurs, mastodons. It seems like even before humans were a big deal, we had critters that would die off. Could it be that that's the way of the world? Could it be that while Darwin didn't get it all right, he was partially right? So you've got the limiting of access to water by these government entities. And then take a look at your if you go to buy a piece of property, look to see if you've got two things attached to your property deed. One is mineral rights. That means anything that is underneath your property, you have the right to make money off of it. If there's things found under your property, like petroleum, like coal, all of these different things that are in Earth. But then the other thing to check is water rights. One of the things that when I got to looking into back in 2014, one of the things I got to looking into when I got to listening to what was happening with the Bundy Ranch was water rights. I know that sounds strange that I would all of a sudden start thinking about that because it really was I'd heard a few odd things from some of the folks that were against it. The government agencies that were against it, BLM, Bureau of Land Management. And I also got to paying attention to some of the fancy projects they had going on government property in Nevada. And it required water. And there ain't a lot of water in Nevada. I'm well aware there ain't a lot of water in Nevada. It's a lot of desert out there. I know there's some water, but there ain't a lot of water out in Nevada. And I'm like, oh, how are they getting water to this fancy Eye of Sauron thing, this solar panel, this weird solar thing out there? Well, government needed to take control of water rights. The Bundy family have their water rights. That means that any water that's on their property, they have control of, not the government. Now, if you've been following the EPA doesn't want you to control the water that's on your property. Now, there are some stupid folks. There are some stupid people that will try to change how streams and lakes and whatnot are done that's on their property. That ain't how you do it correctly. But if you're using that water for growing food, you do need to be able to get it flowing. That water, you got to have water going around. You got to be able to tap that water. My grandfather, back in the early 80s in Tennessee, lost everything because he had two farms. He was trying to sell one, and he had a property. He had moved to a prettier place down off a mountain, and all of a sudden a drought happened, and he couldn't buy enough water. He had had water before, but all of a sudden now there weren't enough water to go around to grow the food. Well, that's Mother Nature for you. That's going to happen. But when there's water sitting around and it ain't being used for nothing because the government says that it can't be used for nothing, it's got to just sit there, we got a problem. Now, if you're in California, you might know about this. There's some farmers out there, and I think it was avocado farmers. It was some kind of, it was a whole bunch of farmers that grew the same thing that had joined up in a little collective out there. Well, they were having problems with getting water, so what they decided, they took this Israeli designed water treatment thing that takes salt water and it purifies it down. May not necessarily be potable, drinkable, in other words, but it can be used to water your crops. And they did this on their own. They didn't go to the government because the government wasn't going to do this. But this is what they used. And this is something, if you think about it, you can do that if you're on the coast. The U.S. is a little too big to do that all over the place. But water is exceedingly necessary, and the government, with these big liberal ideals, have been destroying our ability to get to water that we need to grow our own crops. That's not a good thing, ladies and gentlemen. It really ain't. Now, here's something else that is hurting our food stability in this country. And it's basically the economy, but not the economy in the way that you think. Because even in bad times, you got to have food. But as we've been having these major companies take over everything, because the government, these companies grow to a certain point, and they start to realize we got enough money, we can buy our own politicians. Thus why so many of us rednecks are going, they probably need to have little patches on their suits that show who's sponsoring them when they're up there, so you can tell who they're talking for when they give their press conferences in Congress. Well, these companies will raise the prices up, but they will not pay the farmers the money that they need to keep going. So these farmers are put at the mercy of these major corporations. But if the farmers get smart and go, hey, let's band together like those orange growers did down in Florida. Sorry, my mouth got a little too fast. But you can't really do that now. Why? Because that's competition for these major corporations that are giving politicians money. Government throws way too many obstacles in the way of those folks that are going to compete with their sponsors. The other side of it comes from the fact of that you have unions that have been working to raise the minimum wage. Raising the minimum wage doesn't help anybody. As a matter of fact, it hurts everybody. Whether you're a billionaire or you're the poorest person that's living homeless out on the street, raising the minimum wage doesn't help any of them. Now, some folks have sold a bill of goods to everybody saying, oh yeah, this will do you good. No, it doesn't. This fuels inflation. This fuels companies going, I don't necessarily need to manufacture goods in a place that's got that kind of prices I got to pay the employees, and so they go over to these countries like China and they make things because people aren't going to pay the prices. Now, when it's auto industry, you're kind of stuck. The auto industry, you're really stuck because of the way that we do tariffs in this country. It's smarter to make the cars here. Well, them cars that are being made here, also the safety regulations that they put on these things that don't make no sense half the time. You see how much car prices are raising. Used to be you could get a car for a decent amount of money, just a few $1,000s. Well, that's raised up to the point now where the cheap cars are double or triple that. Part of it is because of how much it costs to get some of this stuff that they need to make these cars, but also it's how much they're having to pay these union employees to work there, all the benefits. And you're going, Well, it don't cost that much. No, compared to all this other stuff. Unions demand that that the people that are unionized get a pension. I want you to take a look at what those pensions cost these companies. I'm going to talk about that later on, but take a look at what pensions do to the economy. You think I'm joking with you. I ain't. But all these prices raising up. Now, you've got tractors. Tractors are way more expensive than that car that you're driving around on these streets. That's an expense for a farmer. Then you've got to have the right implements for that tractor. Then you got to know what's going on with your soil, so you've got to run tests on your soil. Well, you've got to make sure that you can afford them tests, and you got to run multiples of those tests. And you've got to make sure that that tractor is kept up maintenance wise, because if it breaks down, you ain't got that tractor for a while and you're missing out on work, because if it breaks down at the wrong time. Then you take a look at certain times of the year you need people. You might only need certain crops, you need people. It may not necessarily be for the planting, but you've got to have people picking the crops, because you can't do, like, say, tobacco or wheat. You got to have people sitting there pulling the tomatoes off, or cutting the watermelon, or whatnot. Well, used to be that us country kids, would go out there and help with stuff like that. I have cut my fair share of tobacco. I have hauled square bales for several folks, and that takes some effort right there. Now all that's round bales. Kids don't want to toss square bales anymore. They don't want to do that work. That's too hard. That's too hard. So these places that are growing the food that require humans to pick it, most of the time they ain't American citizens that are in there. Nancy Pelosi said it correctly. One of the few times that Nancy Pelosi said it right. We need those Mexican folks up here picking our crops. That's where a lot of California companies, a lot of these California farms, get their crop pickers. They're Hispanic folks that are coming up out of Mexico and making a little bit of money. They got these migrant worker farm or camps in that during that year in California. Tennessee, we ain't got all that. I don't think they got that in Iowa. Well, Iowa, you don't need all that, but Tennessee, we grow stuff. We ain't got the migrant workers going around. So I ain't real sure on how all that works, but that's how they do things there. So if you're having to pay them, you're having to worry about your tractors, but you're not getting paid that much money, because these corporations who you can't fight with, because they got politicians on their side, they got fancy lawyers on their side. That's hurting your economy, and it's hurting everybody else's economy because of how much money they're having to pay for this food. Most people aren't aware of this, but there are certain companies out there that are growing that you buy stuff that says organic on it. 9 times out of 10, that organic food was not grown in the United States. There's one company that buys their organic tomatoes from Israel. Take a look at what it costs in time and money to be able to say that you are an organic farm. Never mind the fact that you most likely are an organic farm. It's not that difficult to make things in an organic way, but to be able to say that you're organic, to be able to put that on your label, you've got to jump through so many hoops, it ain't worth it. Now, all this that I've been talking about are some of the factors as to why food is so much more expensive nowadays. We got corporations that are raising the prices up, but not paying the farmers any money. You got Chinese farmers or Chinese companies that are coming in, buying up all our food companies, trying to buy up all our land. Well, they're going to want to make some money because we got people here. They ain't doing it to send food to them to their own country. While their cities have food, you take a look at what's going on in the countryside in China. Those folks ain't eating all that good. This isn't to the benefit of the Chinese people, it's to the benefit of the Chinese government. And when I say Chinese government, you have to say the Chinese Communist Party because it's one and the same. So you also have to worry about water, but not in a way that you think. And you have to worry about these green energy projects because they're taking it up. All of this is taking up our farmland, or it's forcing the farmers out. And so, yeah, there are some major corporations that are taking over this land, growing food. Look at who they're hiring. I think I'm joking with you. Take a look at who these major corporations are hiring to work on these farms. I've been around dairy farms quite a bit of time in my life. There started to be a trend after I was an adult. It was rarely when I was growing up, but it started becoming a trend that because we got young folks getting taught in the incorrect way when it comes to hard work, all of a sudden you started having non-citizens. A lot of these folks weren't from this country legally. They weren't here legally that were working these dairy farms. You take a look at California and the migrant farm hands. Most of them ain't here legally. Nancy Pelosi said it right. Who we gonna get to pick our food? But to get that food, these farmers have to have water. Well, unless there's some major corporation that can use their bought and paid for politician, they're getting told they can't get water from certain sources. And all of this is creating instability in our food situation. Now, yeah, I just waxed contemporaneously. I just waxed all kinds of over the place. But I hope you listened to me and looked at my examples. And the next time you go to the store and get to realizing why you have to pay so much for food, why there are people that are starving in this country when we got plenty of food but ain't got no common sense on how to get that food to people. I hope that you start thinking about what that is doing to us as a nation. I want you to think about why you have to elect the right people. I want you to think about why you got to buy from the right companies. Not even the right companies. You got farmers markets. Buy from them, not from the supermarket if you can. If you can, grow your own food where you can. Because that's when you can tell if a country is getting unstable, is start watching what's going on with the food. And the food situation in this country is getting a little unstable right now. Right now, it's just at the beginning stages. We can turn it around if we got some common sense put into it. You put a little horse sense into it, it ain't that big a deal. But that's right now. Pretty soon, it ain't going to be that way. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to look into helping me, like, subscribe, comment, all them things. I'm going to put my link tree. See, that was me growing. I talked about that earlier. That's me growing. I notice these folks have link trees. So you can look at my book, being able to access my books down there. It's that itch.io link. It's my book. I put it in a visual novel format. I was trying to grow then, trying to learn something I ain't ever done before. I got a Patreon if you want to help me that way. I'm not saying that you have to. I'm just saying if you want to. I got my Facebook, my MeWe, my Rumble, my YouTube. I don't think I got my Podbean on there, but also I'm on Podbean, Redneck Thinker. But you're listening to me probably on Rumble, or because it's only like one person listens to me on Podbean, and I thank you. I am in no way saying I'm unhappy with that. I thank you for that. And I thank you for all the people listening to me on YouTube and Rumble. I hope y'all have a good day. This is Paul, the Redneck Thinker. Bye now.